Good morning, everyone. I think by now you should be hearing me. If so, can you just confirm it in the chat, please? Yes? Okay, perfect. Perfect. Great. Thanks. So, welcome, everyone. Today we're presenting the Introduction to the RIPE Database webinar. I see we have a whopping 22 people in the room today. That's very good. Very good, very good. So, welcome everyone. Today I'm here with Gerardo. You'll just hear my voice. Gerardo in a moment will probably disappear from your view, but he won't be leaving the room. Actually, Gerardo's role today will be to answer any question you might have while I'm presenting. So for this, I suggest you take a look at the chat. I see a lot of people already wrote there, and I really enjoy that. But if you have any question while I'm presenting, while I'm talking, feel free to write it in the chat. Gerardo will be here to answer any question you might have about the webinar. Not all questions about the universe, life, and everything. No, not those. Yes. So before we start, let's take a look at the interface we have. And you see Gerardo just disappeared. He's sitting here next to me. So if you even feel there's the need for him to stop me and go back to some other parts, don't worry, he can do that. Sorry. So let's take a look at the environment today. On the left of the screen, you have a little recap of all the, well, not all of them, some of the objects we can have in the database. Below that, we're going to have a poll soon. We have some slides with which require a poll. Then next to the poll, we have the chat box. Please feel free to write there any question or any comment you might have. Next to it, on the right, lower right part of the screen, we have a section with the files. There you will find all the slides, and you also find some nice references, all in PDF. So we have a diagram with the overview of all the objects in the database and the relationships. Then we have a mini database reference card. That's a small one, which gives you a recap, again, of all the flags you can use in the queries for the database. Above that, above the files section, there's the attendees section. You can see all the names. You can contact people directly in there. You can chat with other participants. And then there's my face. Hello. In the middle, I'm going to share my screen in a moment when we start. And before we start, let me tell you one last thing. We are recording the webinar. So later on, we'll send you an email with the link to the recording. So if you miss any part, if you get a phone call, if you get disturbed by a colleague or by the kids at home, feel free to pick on the recording later on. So don't worry, it will be fine. Now I'm going to share my screen in a moment. Nope. Oh, wait. Let me share my desktop. There we go. And here we go. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to give you an update, well, an introduction about all the different types of objects. We're going to see how we can create and edit those objects. We're going to be focusing on basically three types: person, maintainer, four: person, maintainer, role, and inetnum. And then we'll see how we can query the RIPE database and get effective data out of those queries. Now, what are we talking about though here? You're here because you're interested in the RIPE database. And most likely, the chances are that you came here because you just became an LAR, or you're a new person working at an established LAR, and you've heard about this RIPE database. But what is it? It was started a long time ago. We're talking about more than 20 years ago, to have a repository where people could look up who is responsible for certain resources. When we talk about resources, we talk about IP addresses, and we're talking about autonomous system numbers. Why do we want to look these resources up? Because you might be under attack from a certain network, you might be having issues reaching a certain service in other parts of the internet, and you want to find contact information related to those resources. So this was the main goal for which the RIPE database was established, was started a long time ago. In the course of time, other functionalities were added, so now we also have a way for you to set up reverse DNS delegations, and this is done with a special type of object called the domain object. And also you can define your routing policy. So some databases, like the RIPE database, can also contain information about how routing should be on the internet. So you can use it as a reference when troubleshooting issues on the internet. And also can be used for setting up filtering based on objects that are created in the database. But what objects do we find there? How are they called? For IP addresses, so IP ranges, we have inetnum and inet6num, depending on being them for IPv4 or IPv6. Then we look at autonomous system numbers, and the name is a bit self-explanatory. Autonum defines an autonomous system number. All these objects are linked to either an organization object, a person, and a role, or a role. An organization object, as the name implies, defines a larger organization, like the company you work for or the non-profit you work for, something like that. While anyone working for one of these organizations should be having his or her own person object. This person object contains contact information like your address, your email address, phone number. We still store fax numbers, although the number of people that use them in the world is constantly dropping. And once you have groups of people, they can be grouped, all of them, in a role. So if you have a NOC in your organization, or if you have an IT department, people can be grouped pointing to their person object in the role objects. Then we go into something a little bit more complicated. You have root and root6 objects which carry information about which autonomous system should be announcing a certain network. So they put together in relationship an inet or inet6num and an autonomous system number and an autonum object. So they point to the respective objects there, and they say this network should be announced by this ASN. So if you look into the routing table on your router, this is what you should see, and this is how you should be filtering. Then we have reverse DNS objects, domain, where you tell the RIPE NCC, hey, these are my DNS servers, and I would like you to point reverse DNS information over to them for these networks that I manage. Last but not least, we have the maintainer object. All the objects that we just talked about are protected by the maintainer object, which, despite the name, contains authentication information. Let's see this in practice a little bit. Let me go to my browser. I will open a new tab and make the text bigger. I'll go to ripe.net. And now that I'm making the text bigger, you should see that here I have an information box that shows me already my IPv6 address. We're lucky to have working and native IPv6 here in the office. But what you can see is that I can copy this, that tells me what my address is, and I go to the other tab, the RIPE database whois. I paste my address here, and I say, show me information about this IPv6 address. Once I click to go on with the search, then I get sent to this page with the results of my search. And as you can see, I think I need to make my text a little bit bigger. There we go. you see that, oh, by the way, you can make the central part of the screen go full screen so you can see this better. My problem now would be if I make the text a little bit bigger, it will just go a little bit crazy with the layout. So you can make it full screen to see better what's happening. Now, you see that this object is an INET6 num, and this represents an IPv6/48. But we told you that everything is protected by a maintainer. So the maintain by here line tells us if you want to modify this object, you can go through this. You have to pass the authentication for this other object, which is a maintainer. Or this other one, you have two options. And if I click on it, I'll open it in a new tab. I'm going into this tab, and as you can see, this object contains information about the authentication. So you can provide authentication with a PGP key or an SSO entry. SSO stands for single sign-on. You can sign on into RIPE NCC Access with your Access account, and if you log in with the right account, you can modify objects that are protected by this one. Going back to my original INET6 num, you can see that it also has other attributes. So I have the net name, so this is a unique identifier for this network. I have the organization object, so it points to an org. We mentioned it, and let me open it for you. So here you see that the RIPE NCC has its own organization object, and it contains information about who is responsible for the operations here at the RIPE NCC. So there are some colleagues like Menno or this, I don't remember who this person is. Oh, well, yes, Axel, our general manager, yes. So there you go. I see we have a question. Is there a place inside my profile that I can print the information? Okay. Gerardo will take care of this. Yes. Yeah, sorry. It's that I thought about a question so early in the training could be something important to answer. Okay, so going back to our organization object, we have admin C, abuse C. We have different kinds of attributes in here, and these attributes define information about the object itself. So, as you could see, once I look for an INET6 num, I get a list of other objects that depend from it. So we see that we get an answer containing a person object, a route 6 object, which tells us that the originator for this /48 should be this AS3333. That's the one we have here at the RIPE NCC, and a lot of other information. So going back to my presentation, we see that the next step will be to try to create a new object. So I'll go back. Sorry for this jumping back and forth, but I'm going to be into web updates. What I can do is I can go into create an object. But if I do it here, actually, I'm working on the production database. This is not good, because we want to be trying out something. So the way I can get to the test database, which is a copy of the software that runs the main production database that's used for testing purposes, I have to go into query the RIPE database, and then I want to go into the test database. How do I recognize I'm in the test database? You see this big yellow band in the middle of the screen. That tells me I'm using the test database. Now I can go on and I click on create an object again. I would like to create just a person object for me in the test database. And I want to log in to create it. Now I'm going to log in with my own credentials. Sorry. Now I'm logged in and I'm going to create my person object. But you see we are now actually, let's not say stuck, but we are stuck because we need a maintainer. So it's mandatory for every object to have a maintainer to use. So in this case, we can't go on and just create a person object directly because we need to have a maintainer. Now, I'll go again and create an object, and you see that the first entry that I'm shown here says create both a person and maintainer pair. So now I'm going to create one. Let's call the maintainer the Stucky maintainer, my maintainer from my surname. Person, I can just put my name, and then I put the address. Sorry, Stationplein, Amsterdam, the Netherlands. There we go. And phone +31 02 2 555 333 444 777. It's a fictitious phone number. I can't remember the exact phone number for the RIPE NCC. Anyway, now that I'm going to click submit, the system automatically creates a maintainer, a person object and a maintainer for me. Now this is because if I go back into my presentation, we have a problem. We have, sorry, when we want to create a person object, the person object needs to reference a maintainer because it needs protection. But when we go and try to create a maintainer, because we think, okay, then I go and create a maintainer first and then I'll create my person object. Now the problem is the maintainer needs an admin C, so someone needs to point to a person object or a role object that says, hey, I'm the administrator of this maintainer. So someone that's put there as a reference. So we have a chicken and egg problem. We need a person object to create a maintainer, but the person needs a maintainer itself. So there is this tool that we just used, which will create both at the same time, as it's shown here. So if I go back to my interface here, you'll see that we have here a nick handle. This is the unique identifier for my person object. And here we have reference to the maintainer, the maintain by. Now, in the maintainer, we have a name, and we have the admin C, which points to me. And also, the authorization says if I'm logged in with these login credentials, if I'm logged in as mstucky@ripe.net with this account in my LAR portal, then it will be fine. Sorry, in the RIPE access, it will be fine. You'll be allowed to modify the object there. So far, so good. Okay, so then we can go back and say, yes, maintainers protect objects and they do it in different ways. We have 3 ways we can be authenticated: by using the PGP key, by using an SSO account, or the last one, which we haven't seen in real life there, is using an MD5 password, which of course gets, well, you don't see in clear text. It gets hashed, salted and hashed, and it gets put into the database. So you can then authenticate using just a simple password, or by logging in with your account, or by modifying the object using a signature with a PGP key, a signature, or just encrypting the content with a PGP key. And as you can see, the reference goes from the person directly to the maintainer, saying you want to change me, you have to go through the authentication from that maintainer. There we go. I mentioned that the authentication can be done in 3 ways. And there can be, as we've seen in the object in the RIPE database, there can be more than one maintainer for every person object or every other object. Now, don't think that this adds protection, because you have to imagine the person object as a room with different doors, and each door is a maintainer. If I get the chance to open one of these doors, I can get to the access to the object in there. So whenever I can pass the authentication for one of these maintainers, then I can modify the object. So actually adding more maintainers doesn't add any protection. I don't have to authenticate with all these maintainers in order to modify the object. I just need to pass the authentication for one. So think about it whenever you want to add more maintainers to just one object. Now, once our company starts growing, once our organization starts growing, we have to look at role objects. I mentioned them already, and I told you that they can point to a group of people. So if you have a NOC, if you have an ops department, you want to have a role object for different reasons. One of them is this. Imagine we have a situation where we have John Smith. John Smith works for a certain organization, and by policy you need to create an INET-num every time you assign addresses to your customers. So John Smith does the right thing. He creates all these objects, but then you see that all the objects point directly to his person object. So what happens when John Smith gets replaced by Sue Baker? Sue Baker has to go and change all the occurrences of John Smith's nick handle in all the INET-nums. And this is a long and tedious project to do. Imagine if you're in an organization that has thousands of customers, so you have to do thousands of changes in the database. Yeah, but with role objects, we simplify your life. So John Smith points himself to a role. So you create a role that says this is the group of administrators of the LAR, and then you point the role to your own person object. What happens is, wait, when John Smith decides to leave or takes different decisions, now Gerardo is going to enable you a nice poll on the lower left. Decide, please take a decision on, tell us what you think happened to John Smith. Did it walk under a tram? Was eaten by piranhas in Amsterdam? Legend says there are some piranhas in the canals. Or he won the lottery and is now in the Bahamas, or he was turned into a person object. What do you think? The magic powers of the right database, exactly. Let's wait for a moment, give you more time, because I see that in reality, like 14 people we have 32 participants so far. That's very good. That's very good. Okay. Now, yes, I see that you really like the fact that that John Smith could be turned into a person object. Okay, so let me go back one slide. And what happens when you have a role object? You can actually go back to going back to the previous slides. Imagine we have John Smith here. We were pointing to a role object. It would make things much easier to manage. So how does it work here? We have the LAR admin. John Smith joins the company. The LAR admin is referenced from the INET-nums, and when John Smith is turned into a person object by the superpowers of the RIPE database, Sue Baker joins in. She just has to add herself to the role, and that's it. One modification changes all the references in all the remaining objects in the database. So this makes things much easier to manage. Now, let me get out of the presentation for a moment and go back to our database. So what I'm going to do now, before we go into and look into the role objects, I want to create a person object for Gerardo, because today I'm good. Now, I don't have to create again another maintainer. I have my own maintainer. I can do that. I can create a person object directly in the test database. So I'm going to create it. And you see that automatically my maintainer gets put here for the new object that I want to create. So let's go ahead. Gerardo. The address is the same. Stationsplein 11, Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Phone, let's put 31, 2, blah, blah, blah. Okay, random phone number. The nick handle will leave auto, or actually, let's do auto1. He likes being called this way. I'm going to show you that when I click submit, you see that I influenced how his nick handle got created. So you can put up to 4 letters there after auto-1 to say generate the nick handle automatically, but use these 4 letters if possible as the first part of the nick handle. So he got Jerry1-test. I see that he really likes it. He loves it. Okay, good. So what can we do now? I can go back and create another object. Now that I have both my person object and Gerardo's person object, I can go and create a role. Oops. And when I create a role, I can call it training, webinar, today, duo. The address, again, Stationsplein 11 in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Email, I'll put my own email. I used to put training@ripe.net, but that gets read by a colleague, and Olivia doesn't like emails that are not work-related for her. So, auto-1, let's do webinar again. Now I'm missing some attributes here that I'm going to add. The role, like the goal of a role object, is to point to the people who are in the role, like in the group. And this is done via 2 different attributes. So I'm going to click on plus and then add admin C. So I'll add 1. And I'll add also, under that, I'll add the text C. The difference between the 2 is that, as you can see, here it says the nick handle of an administrative contact. So someone who is administratively responsible for the network or for the other objects or for the organization. So here I'm going to put, of course, Jerry1-test, because he is responsible for this. Voila. And then I'll add myself as a technical contact. Technical contact is someone who's responsible for the technical aspects of our LAR or the network or here. When I click submit, the role gets created, and we have Webby1-test as our role object right now. So going back to our slides, as you can see now we have a role object that we could use as a reference when we create the following INET nums or other kinds of objects. Voila. Now moving on, when we query the RIPE database, we can use different ways. We have the web interface, the one that we just showed you. It's called Web Updates. You can use the command line using the whois client. You can go via the full text search, and that's needed in certain cases that we'll see later on when you want to do some specific lookups. And then last but not least, we also have an API, a RESTful API where you can both query and also make updates to the database. We do have query limits, though. Some years ago, it was decided to put query limits because we have privacy-sensitive data in the database. So you saw that I just put my address in there. Actually, the address I put in the database is the address where the RIPE NCC is, but that's sensible data, especially for person and role objects. If you want your phone number, your email address to be available there because, well, you want to be contacted by other operators if there's the need to get in touch with you, then you want to put that data in the database, but you don't want people to abuse it. So there's a maximum number of queries you can do per day if you're querying for sensitive data, so if you're querying for person and role objects. And once you exceed those limits, you get blocked. So there's a way around this. If you don't need, like you're just looking into networks or root objects, you can limit what you're shown. So you can use the no personal flag, --no -personal flag, to limit the query. So you're telling the database, don't give me personal data, don't give me sensitive data. I'm just interested in what's operational data here in the database. So you will be bypassing all the query limits. What can you look into the database when we talk about more specific? What can you look for? Imagine we have a /21. So you have your own network, but you want to see who, when, what was created by your colleagues because you just joined the company, and you want to see from that allocation, from the allocation you have, what's there, what's created as assignments. If you use the -m flag, the -m flag, and you provide a network, a range of addresses, then the database will tell you, hey, these are all the networks that are inside, these are all the ranges that have been created inside that range. With -m, we go one level deeper. But if we go for capital M, the database will return each and every single network that's just below the level you're querying for. So in this case, you see, differently from the previous slide, we also see that little /26 in the lower left side of the screen. That wouldn't be proposed once we were looking at the -m output. We can run a similar query going the other way around, though, using the -l. In this case, we're querying for the /24, and we're telling the database, hey, tell me what object is above the one I'm querying you for. Because you want to find out what allocation this IP address comes from, or what allocation this assignment comes from. You might want to find out what's above it. And you can do it for just one level using the -l flag, or for the capital L, you get to see all the networks that are above it. So let's go back to our database, now my browser. And if I go back to, I still have my address copied in here. I can paste it into the database query, and I query for it. This is exactly the same query we did earlier today, and we get just this /48 as output. But what if I add my -l? So let me see what's all the levels above this this address. Let's see. So as you can see, we start from the very top of the networks, 0/0, all zeros. And then we go down. If we go down, we get there's a /23 that's allocated to the RIPE NCC, European Regional Registry, and it's allocated by the RIR. So this was allocated by IANA to the RIPE NCC for making these assignments. And then if I walk down between other objects, I have another /29 that's used for these type of allocations. And if I go down, I find this one, which is actually not an allocation, so I should correct myself. It's an assignment. This is PI. You can find more information about PI in our new LIR webinars, actually. So PI is small parts of the address space that is supposed to be assigned directly from the RIPE NCC to the end users, so that the end users can be provider independent. They don't depend on their ISP for the addresses that are given to them. They can move from one ISP to the other, bringing their own addresses along with them. Now we can also do inverse lookups in the database. So if we have just one piece of the information, so this is an example, we know we have a person object and we want to find out where this person object is referenced. Imagine you are about to leave an organization and you want to find out if your person object, which you want to carry with you to your new organization, or you just want to clean it, you want to find out which objects are referencing this one. So you can use -i, that's a flag in the database, and say, give me all the places where the admin C is my object, jd1-ripe. And here you see that the output would be those three objects. So we have an auth_num, maintainer, and role. We don't get the inet6num in the answer because in the inet6num, jd1-ripe is a technical contact. So how do we fix this? How would we change it? We can do a query that's slightly different where we say -i person. Give me all the occurrences of these person in different objects, independently if it's in the tech C or the admin C. Show me where my object is referenced, anywhere. We can do the same for a maintainer, for example, in maintain by. So in this case, we have -i, maintain by, lir-mnt. You want to see all the objects that are protected by this maintainer, because maybe you forgot the password for it, and before you want to get involved with password recovery, you want to make sure that password recovery is worth the time you're spending for it. So you want to find out all the objects that reference that maintainer are protected by it. Now, as you can see, similar to the example we just gave you, here there's one of the objects which doesn't have the maintainer mentioned as maintain by, but they have it as maintain lower, which is slightly different. So here we wouldn't get any answer back. Well, we wouldn't see that this maintainer is mentioned in maintain lower in the inet6num. This is a limitation of the database as it is now. It doesn't perform queries for maintain lower. So in this case, what we can do is go into the text search in the database. So I'll show you how we can do that. If I go up here, all the way up in my web updates, I have the full text search here, and I can run my search for the, I don't know, what can I look for? Let's just look for my name. Just my name. If I were to look for my name in the normal web updates box, nothing would show up because my name as entire is different. But here I get all the occurrences of this name in all the different objects in the database. So I have actually 6,000 objects, 6,000 person objects with that name, 448 inetnums which mention that, and so on. If I click on it, I can get all the results with all the names in there, and this is done by a different part of the code in the database. So you see that it gives us all the occurrences of that word in every database, in every object in the database. Sorry. Do we have any questions? Yes. Is there anything I should? The maintain. Okay. What is the difference between maintain by and maintain lower? Okay. So when we have an inetnum, for example, if I go back, what happens is that you see here we have a /32. The maintain by is the maintainer that protects the object itself, while the maintain lower protects the range below that address. So if I want to create another object below, like in that /32, I want to create an inet6num for a /48 inside that /32, I have to provide authentication for the LAR-MT. If I want to modify the INET6num object there, I would have to pass the authentication for the RIPE NCC host master maintainer. They have different roles in the protection of the object. Again, if I can modify that object, and I have I'm mentioned in maintain by, I can modify it and add myself as maintain lower, so I actually have a lot more power in that. But these are better explained in the advanced database webinar, and also in our. Actually, let me push this. You can also learn about this, learn a bit more about it in the academy, where we have a full course about the RIPE database. It's free for everyone, and you can see, you can learn by also trying different exercises in the test database that we set up for you there. At the end of the course, if you pass all the activities with a good score, then you also get a certificate that shows your knowledge. And then we have a Twitter account, and this is the end. So I see that I answered the question that was there. Do we have anything else? No? Oh. Okay. Yes, Gerardo just reminded me that we can also tell you about our other upcoming event. We have an event called the Educa. We're going in the Educa to talk about routing security. And that's on the 10th of April, so in less than a month, it's coming up. So if you're interested in learning about routing security, please take a look at our event. Now we're going to paste the URL for you to get more information in a moment. I'll have to go and find it. But in the meantime, thank you very much for participating in our webinar today. I see we were a lot of people, like 32 participants. That's a very high number. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. We will be trying to do our best to answer them right now. In the meantime, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.